Hi everyone, this is Lisa Grace and welcome back to the Teach Middle East podcast. It is so good to be back in the new year 2022. I hope you all had a fabulous break and that you're back and raring to go. Today we're talking about diversity and we're looking actually into a survey that was done. So I do have several guests with me today. It's quite unusual. Normally I talk one-on-one or with two people, but today I am grateful to have 4 guests with me. I do want them to introduce themselves, so I won't go into introduction myself, but we are going to be looking at a diversity baseline survey that they've done called Determining the Diversity Baseline in International Schools.
You are listening to the Teach Middle East podcast, connecting, developing, and empowering educators.
I was quite intrigued by the survey when I came across it on LinkedIn because I wanted to know if there was any kind of survey or any kind of study being done on the makeup of international schools. And when I came across this, I thought, yes, this is a brilliant starting point. And I'm obviously going to want to dive a little bit deeper in with the panel that I've assembled today. So welcome everybody to the podcast. It's so good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Brilliant. So I'll just start from my left and ask Dana to introduce herself, and then we'll carry straight on.
Hi, my name is Dana Watts. I'm the Director of Learning, Research, and Outreach, International School Services. And prior to that, I worked within the international schools for about 14 years.
Brilliant. Carry on with Kimberly.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Daly. I am the coordinator for Project Ignite, which is a grant project at George Mason University. And I also teach educational coursework to free and in-service teachers at George Mason in Virginia.
Thank you. Anne?
Hi, I'm Anne, and I'm doing a 2-year internship at the Council of International Schools. I have this research project, and in the survey, I was involved in the data analysis. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and right now I'm following a master's program in statistics and data science at Leiden University in the Netherlands.
Welcome, Anne. And Alejandra.
Hello, my name is Alejandra Neyra, and I'm a data analyst at the Council of International Schools, and I'm also a member of the Diversity Collaborative Data Committee.
Brilliant. It's so good to have you all here. So I have quite a packed room, but good. I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about the survey and what your findings were. But before we dig into that, love to know a little bit about why this survey, why was it commissioned? What was the thinking behind it? So feel free to jump in. Why was the survey commissioned?
So the project started in 2020 and is an initiative of the Diversity Collaborative Data Committee, International School Services, George Mason University, and the Council of International Schools. And that's why you see all of us here today. And the data committee, we were discussing the lack of diversity data from faculty and staff in international schools, both from the quantitative side, from the qualitative side. And the need to collect this data to understand where we are, to create awareness, and to drive change in schools committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's why we developed this survey with the purpose to collect this baseline data from boards, heads, leadership team, and teachers in international schools around the world.
So picking back from something you said, were schools willing to offer this data? Was that something that they were happy to offer?
It was difficult to collect responses. You can see the response rate is low. And this is something that we hope in the future years that we get a higher response rate.
So it's this survey, is it going to continue in years to come? Is that the hope?
Yes, the plan is to do it every 2 years so we can actually monitor trends over time.
I love that. I actually love that. Do keep us posted here at Teach Middle East because we would love to see how this data is changing, especially with increasing awareness. You know, does it make a difference? And is there any kind of shift in the way international schools are made up as we progress? Tell us about the sample then. What was the sample like that you collected?
Okay, so most schools who took part in the survey were located in Asia, is 58%, And 19% of schools were located in Europe and 12% in Africa, and then a few schools in South America, North America, and Oceania. And in the sample, we looked at the gender ratio, nationalities, and ethnicities for the board members, leadership teams, heads of schools, and teachers. We specifically compared the female-male ratio and also identified the 10 most common nationalities and compared nationalities from Western versus non-Western countries. Whereby Western countries, we counted Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe, the US, and Canada. And for ethnicity, we compared 8 different ethnic groups and also specifically compared white versus non-white ethnicity because the white ethnicity was dominant in the sample.
Brilliant. So let me ask you a question about your data. In terms of the mix of schools, where did you get the majority of your responses from? Was it Asia? Was it Middle East? Was it Africa?
The majority was in Asia. 58% of schools who participated are located in Asia, and then secondly, Europe and Africa.
Okay. And in Asia, are we talking predominantly China or a nice mix of the Asian countries?
It was a mix of different Asian countries.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Anne. But at this moment, I mean, in our history, in our time, when we're living, why is this survey so important? What propelled you?
Well, this survey is important. The Diversity Collaborative started doing work on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice a couple of years ago. And our first attempt at a survey was to understand the conditions of leadership in international schools. So moving forward from leadership in international schools, then we were starting to break that down and look at the educators and the boards and have the accreditation agencies start to understand what the makeup of the educators and the boards were in the international schools. And unless you get baseline data, you can't start to see trends over time, and you don't see the conditions in the schools and start to see where changes might be needed and where work is being done in the international school system until you have the data. So this started as an effort a couple of years ago to look at leadership first, and then we are progressed throughout the international school system. So this is important work because those of us who are in the international school system, who have worked with international school teachers or boards or the administrations, we know that there are issues in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in these school systems, but we don't know the numbers until you collect the data.
Kim, stick with me a minute on that. Okay. Have you seen any other survey that is similar?
Have I seen any other surveys there? I mean, the work that the Diversity Collaborative is doing is probably the largest efforts I've seen. And I know that now there are people starting to do dissertations and theses because we are getting asked for our data. And that's a wonderful thing. And if we can be, Diversity Collaborative can be a repository for others to start doing these efforts, that's fantastic. And we have members. Dana, you could probably tell me how many members in the Diversity Collaborative, but there are hundreds, perhaps thousands. Around the world who are involved in this work and involved in these issues. So we know the scale and the scope, and the more people taking up this work and looking at these numbers and looking at this type of research, the more we can see what's going on the ground and perhaps affect, schools can affect change.
The thing is, I've long had anecdotal data in my head, having worked in international schools for several years, actually. I've anecdotally noticed the trends, but I've obviously not had any empirical data to back up any of what I've been noticing. And so when I came across this on LinkedIn, I thought, well, finally somebody's putting some empirical data together to actually quantify what I've been seeing, from my layman's observation of things, because I could close my eyes with my knowledge, especially of the Middle East. I could close my eyes and think of 80% of the international schools have a very, very similar ethnic and gender makeup. It really is, there is absolutely a breadth in diversity in those schools. And so now I want to kind of dive into your findings, because I know what I've seen anecdotally, but I'd love to see what the survey came up with, what the results were in terms of like board of governors and the school leadership and the teaching population. How did this come up in terms of results? What did you find?
Well, that's a great question. And I think you're spot on. Like, we had all this anecdotal evidence, and for years, I think many of us have seen, underrepresentation within our heads of school and different different positions within our schools. And so it's nice to have the data to back it up, and hopefully we'll have that over time. And one thing I just wanted to piggyback on what Kimberly was saying was that, within Diversity Collaborative, what's nice is there's no overseeing company or organization of all the international schools. And what has been really, I think, helpful with the Diversity Collaborative is it's everyone coming together. So we have different accreditation agencies helping us. CIS has been phenomenal. And when we sent the survey out, WASC jumped on board and sent it to all of their members. And now we have even more accreditation agencies saying, hey, how do we get more involved? How do we make sure that we send this out, every other year? How can we help? And things like that. And we have, the folks at George Mason helping us really make sure that the study has credibility, right? It's not just, some of us trying to come up with, here are some questions and we're going to throw them out there. Let's make sure that, that they make sense and that the data is solid and it's open and free to anyone who wants it for these different things. So that, I think, has been huge. With the key findings for the study in general, first we kind of looked at gender equity and then nationalities and then ethnicity. And so with gender equity, our key finding was really that women are underrepresented, which I think is probably not a big surprise to any of us, in boards and heads of school. Yet they're completely overrepresented in our teacher population. And so there's a disconnect there. With our nationalities, we looked at the most represented nationalities within our schools were from the United States and Canada and the UK. But the Western countries are overrepresented across all the stakeholders. And that's not in keeping with who we teach and our student population. So there's a disconnect there as well. And then with ethnicity, people having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe are overrepresented across all our stakeholders, even though 78% of our schools are not located in Europe or North America. So there's an obvious disconnect there as well. The largest gap was present in the heads of school, who were 3 times more likely to be male than female, 8 times more likely to be from a Western country, and 5 times more likely to be white. A saying that I say maybe too often, but we tend to be male, pale, and stale. And we really need to start representing the students that we teach. And the students that we teach should be able to see themselves represented within our school leadership teams. And additionally, I think there's a difference between front of house and back of house. Often the front of house tends to also be that one demographic. And in the back of house, our school admissions or our directors of curriculum, things of that nature, that might be where some of the diversity is more prevalent.
Yeah. In the Middle East, you would find a lot more of your Arabic teachers or your Islamic teachers being the diversity within the school, because schools will tell you they are diverse, but obviously it's because they can't find anybody who could fit the majority demographic to teach those subjects. So they're diverse by default, but not intentional. Because here's what happens. You have these mandates to teach these subjects. You can't teach them. So you have to get people who are of that race or of that background to teach those subjects. But have you done anything to be intentionally diverse? No. Very, very few schools have done anything. I wondered in terms of your findings with the teaching population, within the teaching population. I know that majority are female, but what were your findings within the teaching population for diversity in terms of ethnicity? I think you might have mentioned, but let's reiterate for a little bit.
We found that about 27% of our teachers identified as white, and then 13% as Asian, and then around 5% for Black and Latinx, also 5%. And then we had multiracial Middle Eastern at like 3.8 and multiracial at 3.9. So it slowly petered down as far as that was concerned.
I noticed you said something about the Board of Governors being a little bit more diverse than the actual heads of schools. Why do you think that is?
Actually, I'm not quite sure why that is, but it is possible that different schools have different priorities in hiring their boards. Different schools have different strategic plans, different schools have different priorities in hiring their boards, and sometimes those priorities are not always lined up in the same way. So in terms of boards, we found that the gender was about 60% male and 40% female. And I just also want to say something about the survey. One of the things about the survey is people could answer, they could complete the survey or they could answer some of the questions. So the data points are slightly different in some places as well. So we did have, I think it was 52 complete responses, and then there were 123 partial responses. So if they didn't have the numbers for something, or it may have been too cumbersome, or they didn't track those numbers, they may not have answered those questions. And different schools also have different mechanisms for doing that. And as well as I do, international school staffs change over every so many years, and they do not always stay in the same country for a long time. So, the mechanisms for keeping data may be different in different places as well. So getting back to the boards, we did find that the primary nationality from a board, it was close, but it was most represented by the United States of America, and it was 51% Western countries to 49% non-Western countries. And then the next highest country was Canada, and then the UK, which included Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And then it went down from there. Now, for our definition for Western countries, we're developed countries following Western culture, such as individualism. They include Western European countries, North America, Australia, and New Zealand. That's the definition we were following. As far as ethnicity goes, though, on the board, we had 44% of board members were white. For schools located in Asia, though, the majority of the board members were Asian, while for schools located in Europe or Africa, the majority of the board members were white, which made sense given place.
Well, it does make sense given the place in Europe, but it doesn't make complete sense in Africa at all.
No, but the fact that they're coming, for schools located in Asia, the majority of the board members being Asian. Yes, we also had less respondents coming from Africa overall too.
I can imagine. And then I know you probably didn't ask why, so I'm just asking you why, as people who've kind of dealt with the data over time. Why do you think the heads of international schools are predominantly white and male? Do you have any idea what could be the cause of that?
I think that what happens is that we have these glass ceilings in the pipeline, and that I think for some reason there's this viewpoint that you need to be a white male to lead a school. And no matter, when we look at, who are our teachers, when I chunk up the data where I just look at gender, or I just look at nationality, or I just look at ethnicity, it's obvious that you have a huge advantage if you're male from a Western country and you're white. But the pipeline seems to be cut off. And I wonder often, I think that, when we look at our schools and we look at who our teachers are, I did my dissertation on professional development in the international schools, and our elementary school teachers tend to have the least amount of experience in professional development in leadership, where our middle school and high school teachers are getting those leadership opportunities because they're leading the grade 8 English team, or they're leading, the math department in the high school. So they're getting some of those leadership skills to move over. But we have more female teachers in our elementary schools, but then there isn't the English lead for kindergarten. You're teaching English, math, science, social studies, and everything else in between. So that those leadership opportunities are less, and so they're not having that experience. And so our secondary teachers tend to be in the pipeline. It has nothing to do with the study, but I think that is something to do with, why some of those pipeline issues are coming up. And managing people, they don't have that same responsibility. They're not managing budgets where, as an English department chair, I had to manage, my budget for all the English books and things of that nature. That's just my thought.
No, it's a good thought. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. When you are a primary school teacher, there are less opportunities for you to become a leader within, the middle leadership strata of the school. And unless there is deliberate action taken to offer you that leadership training and mentoring, you won't get it. It's not something that is built in the way it is for secondary or even middle school. So I never actually thought of it. That's actually something to think about. Okay, so I know you said earlier that you didn't get a huge amount of responses, but did you send out to a lot of schools? And why do you think the response wasn't as forthcoming as you would have liked? I probably would piggyback down to Alejandra for this one.
We sent it to 9 accreditation agencies, and we promoted quite heavily via various channels. I think it's data that is difficult to collect. It's not a mandatory survey. It's on a voluntary basis. So when we started, I was curious to see what was going to be the response rate, because I've been in multiple conversations where there's even concerns about asking this information. So
what concerns? What concerns were there?
I have the same question. For me, is we need to know where we are, to know how things are changing. To be able to monitor, we need to know the current situation. But I think just this response rate that we got tells us a little bit that maybe other people think differently, or it may not be seen as a priority.
And that's a problem in itself. If it is not seen as a priority, then we definitely have a problem, because you can't change something that you don't find to be an important thing to change. And that, I think that's where we're going to be stuck if we can't get schools. I'm hoping that, this podcast, school leaders listen to it. If this survey comes to you in another year or year and a half, please respond to it, because this data helps to set a benchmark and helps to guide us in our understanding of what's actually happening in schools, DEIJ. The first step you can take. It's interesting because a lot of schools, when you step to them and ask the questions, they would never admit to not being, intentionally diverse. They wouldn't. Even if in their mission statement they write, we pride ourselves on being a diverse community of learners. And I've seen that so many schools and so many mission statements and in so many brochures. But if you're refusing, so I'm speaking to you, my audience, if you are refusing to complete a survey about the diverse makeup of your school or the lack thereof, then how are you showing goodwill towards what you have put in your brochure, on your website, and in all the different places that you say that you are diverse? For me, my next question is, what are the next steps? Where does it go? What are the further surveys, and where do you see this going?
So we have, now that the survey is closed, we want to revise the survey. We want to see if we need to change some questions. And as I said, we want to administer it every 2 years, so we can really monitor gender equality and cultural diversity over time. As we've been talking, we need a higher response. And thank you for giving us this opportunity, because we need more schools on board to answer the survey. And we also have a list of schools that they provided us this information, and they are excelling in this area, and they are willing to share their stories with the Diversity Collaborative. So we are also planning to share this qualitative data with the international school community. And there is a different group from the data committee already working on this.
Brilliant. Well, I do hope that schools listening to this podcast or seeing, clips of this podcast on social media will take the challenge and will answer the survey when it does come out, or similar surveys should they come out, because this data is very vital. I think that really is it. Do you have anything to add before we wrap up this podcast?
I just had one thing that I wanted to say is I think that really, in addition to hoping people take the survey, I hope they start actually looking at what this looks like within their own school as well. And I think in a post-George Floyd world where there's now a spotlight on DEIJ, and what does that mean in our schools, and what does that mean within pipelines and leadership in all around the world, right? But specifically, I think in schools, I think it's huge. Plus, because of COVID and because of the pandemic and visa restrictions, schools need now more than ever to really look at where is our leadership coming from? How are we opening up pipelines? How are we helping people make sure that they are equally represented within our schools? And I wonder and I hope that international schools really start to redefine what does it mean to be international. It is not just a very traditional white colonialism. This is how schools should be. And this is our view of a very Western version of what schools should be. But how do we really embrace the fact that we're overseas, that we have phenomenal resources within our schools, within our school communities, within our host countries? And how do we really make truly international? And I hope that that's my hope for international schools, and that we start to really represent every international school tends to put on their webpage the huge amount of diversity they have in their student body. But when we've asked them to give us the facts about their leadership teams, they're like, oh, well, that's going to take too long. And, well, we're okay on that. We're not going to, hopefully we start to really represent and do a better job, because we can.
Yeah, I definitely like what you said about putting your students out there. You're diverse, but you never really want to show what the staff makeup is. Yes, Kimberly.
Well, and just to piggyback on what Dana said, for years we have seen that student diversity. We've seen international schools tote that they've had 80 nationalities, 100 nationalities, and it's always referring to the students and how international they are when it comes to the students. But they don't drill down the numbers of the faculty, the staff, the support staff, the local hires, and the boards. And those, they need to drill down that and be aware of how inclusive are they when it comes to what the people you are hiring to work with your diverse student population, because it needs to mirror that diversity that you see in the students in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of nationality. And the time has come for the schools to recognize that. We can't be led. And I taught in an English classroom for 15 years. And, pretty much it was a lot of white women. Males were even hard to come by. So it needs to change.
I love that. There is need for change. And there's a place for everybody. It's not the exclusion of whites. It's the inclusion of everyone else. That's what it is. I'm really, really glad we had this chat. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you so much, Alejandra, for responding to my message on LinkedIn. You don't always get people responding, but I saw the survey and I thought, oh my gosh, I'd love to talk to the people behind this, because this is really interesting. I've not seen people being intentional about finding out this data, and this data is vital. For you to effect change, you have to know where you're starting, and you cannot know where you're starting without data. I'm really, really happy that we had this chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Teach Middle East podcast. Visit our website, teachmiddleeast.com, and follow us on social media. The links are in the show notes.